Someone save me.
No one will save you. You and your magic rocks are all mines.
Oh no. Won't a brave hero save me?
How do I always get suckered into these things?
That is not the line. I said, ahem. Oh no. Won't a brave or even stupid hero save me?
Do I have a choice?
Nope, not according to the script.
Do you two mind? That awesome gaming video is about to start and I don't want to miss it.
Okay, fine, insert heroic line here with zap zap and pew pew effects.
Wait, did you seriously say pew pew effects? Erg, arg, aw, and some serious oukies, you killed me.
Good.
Welcome to Roasted Phoenix Game Review, where we review retro games for the modern times. I am your host Marcus, and I am joined by the lovely Natasha.
Thank you for the warm intro, and hope you're ready because today we have a great game to look at, The Legend of Zelda for the Nintendo Switch Online service. The first game in a 35-year and still going franchise. As you can see, we're still in costume. I am the beautiful Princess Natasha, and I am looking forward to discussing this great game with our hero of wine.
Ouch, those words would hurt so much if not for the added defense from the Red Ring. These reviews are not sponsored, and all opinions are provided as is for entertainment value.
We call it as we see it. We grew up with these games when they were originally released, and have been enjoying them as they are re-released, at least in some cases. We will not let nostalgia blind us to whether the game is a buy or not in today's market. If you like what you see and would like to help the channel grow, please like, share and subscribe. Affiliate links in the description for the hardware used in the video. Also for more information, please visit roastedphoenix.com.
Now, on with the show.
Awesome, so where should we begin?
How about with the most important part, how can you play the game in 2022?
There are several ways to play The Legend of Zelda, but the most current is through the Nintendo Switch Online service, which for this game does not require the expansion pack. As for current pricing, at the time of this video it would cost $20 for the basic online choice and $50 for the Switch Online, with expansion pack.
Now there is a lot of talk about whether the expansion pack is good or what have you, but since The Legend of Zelda is available on the basic subscription level, I will just give my short opinion on this. It is more expensive than it is worth today, for my play style, but I am optimistic that it has potential. I believe that the bundling of Animal Crossing expansion bloats the price and it combined with the performance issues, makes it a rough sale. The basic level is worth it.
As long as they can improve the communication on the game releases, subscription services shouldn't keep you in suspense. Fortunately, it is still available on the original NES cartridge. But remember that we are talking a game with 35-year-old batteries. For what it is worth, it is not too difficult to replace a battery, but it is something to keep in mind. As you can see from my copy, wear and tear can get extreme. Other options include the classic NES series, version on the Game Boy Advance, which puts Zelda in your pocket. As you would expect, this also uses a battery, and it is a little trickier to swap. Of course, you may end up with stickers from used game markets, but that just gives it flavor.
Can they be removed?
There are adhesive removers and isopropyl alcohol should work. Might vary based on the age and sticker type, but I just leave them on out of the lazies. But wait, there are even more ways to play. GameCube had a Nintendo Power Collector's Disc with a guide, which covers The Legend of Zelda 1 and 2 as well as the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask that came with it.
Now, I am not going to lie, optical discs scare me, they are fragile. All optical media, not just or limited to GameCube as I have the same concerns with my PS2/3/4 games and all my movies. They can break, warp with time and heat or just get scratched. Just be careful if buying this without seeing it.
Definitely a good point to keep in mind. Aftermarket sellers for old games might not always be legit. Always check your sources to avoid disappointment. And then there were the virtual console releases, including the Game Boy 3DS, Wii, and Wii U. These options use save states saved to the system via SD card. This is the trailer from the Wii U eShop, where it is still available for $5. I tried looking into how long the virtual console would be online, but only found some meh levels of info. Currently, as of this video, you would need to use funds from a Nintendo account the same as you would on the Switch itself, but the specific Wii U/3DS based sales have been ended.
So when it comes to virtual console, for those platforms, would expect little and act fast. There are a few games that are available on there that are not as easy to get elsewhere, such as Earthbound.
In my opinion, it is worth taking a look if you have a Wii U/3DS and just make sure you have anything you can't get elsewhere.
I would just be careful since it can all go away one day, and no one knows or at least will say when.
Well, it is nice to know that the original game made Nintendo some money for each platform. Wait. I know you won't believe me, but there is even one more way to play with the Legend of Zelda Game & Watch.
This is my desk clock. I keep it plugged into the USB on the Switch and love it. About every hour it will have a dungeon boss fight and other little things that make it interesting. I am betting that keeping it on so long will kill it quicker, but for now it's working just fine. Also, talking about the Game & Watch leads perfectly to the next segment, graphics and sound. Please tell us about the music.
The first thing we hear when loading the game is the opening score composed by Koji Kondo. Koji has an extensive list of games that he wrote the music for. In addition to most of the Zelda and Super Mario Bros. Series, he has also worked on Punch-Out!, Star Fox and Super Smash Bros. So as for graphics, well, it is the original Nintendo, so let us keep our expectations reasonable. The game starts you with no items or anything, so you will have to go exploring. Fortunately, the first area has a cave with the classic iconic meme, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," as he hands you a wooden sword.
Yeah, I had one of those when I was growing up, but we called it a stick.
It's funny, I always thought it looked more like a paddle, but I digress. The game is sprite-based, and we should keep in mind that this is one of the early Nintendo releases. So, color palette swaps are used for a few monsters like Tektites and Gorilla. Repetitive tiles will make most of the screen, but let us be honest. Are you playing the first game in the series expecting it to look like Breath of the Wild? First thing you will notice is that the Overworld map is a gray box with a dot to show where you are. Since the Overworld maps are limited to 16 columns and 8 rows, you can use it with a printed map to get a general idea of your location. At best, it is extremely basic, and the dungeon maps are a little better.
How would you say this compares with the games later in the series?
When I compare the first and second game, and unlike a lot of people, I enjoyed Zelda 2. Listening to the gameplay from Zelda 2, you can tell they are different songs and not the same flavor of music. I am not saying Zelda 2 is bad, but this is one of those times when the original/first is better than the sequel. As for Zelda's 2 graphics, I would say there are some improvements and things were done a little differently than the first game, but I would say that it still feels like it is Nintendo. Until Super Nintendo, where it just becomes an issue of what the hardware can support. Nothing personal, but we need to understand that nostalgia can only do so much in comparison of NES with the bare bones of audio, versus the Super Nintendo having a dedicated SSMP chip. As for comparing the graphics of the first NES Zelda versus the first Super Nintendo Zelda, we will just say that it ends the way you expect, with A Link to the Past kicking its ass.
Seeing Link to the Past makes me want to play it now, thanks.
When we compare it to one of the latest Zelda releases, which is A Link's Awakening, 8 bits will always be 8 bits. The audio differences, and all the various effects are noticeable on the Switch, and while expected, it may be a little tricky to go from a current game to retro without a little ear shock.
For as much as we may love the old school look, it has aged. It has aged well, but still shows its limitations.
If they remade Zelda 1 and 2 like they did for Link's Awakening, I would buy it.
What a shocker after showing us the other versions just a minute ago. But since we don't have that, back to 8 bits, and while we're talking about 8 bits, let's dive into the 8 buttons. Time for gameplay and controls.
Certainly, the gameplay is straightforward, as in you can attack in the cardinal directions only. The only exception is the boomerang, which can be thrown diagonally. Most areas will have a goal, such as move a block, use a bomb to open a wall, or kill all the monsters to open the shuttered doors. There are a lot of areas to explore with hidden items and other elements which are challenging. I would say that the game difficulty is lower than the Zelda games that came after it. There are puzzles where you can struggle to find your way through. In later Zelda games there will be cracks in the walls to show where there are weak spots, but in the first game there are no clues. Certain rooms will require you to move a block, but they all look the same. In short, a lot of the game will need you to explore and find it for yourself, or the other approach is to use a guide.
Excellent to know. Now looking at the game, what can you tell us about the controllers?
The controllers each have their own set of quirks. Original NES, what better example of controllers than the OG NES? Surprisingly, the Nintendo controller felt like a Nintendo controller, a real shocker. The one I have is obviously old, so it has the expected wear and tear, but is still a good controller. The D-pad is responsive, and the red buttons work as expected. The Start/Select button seemed a little sluggish, i.e. had to hit push twice. All in all, an excellent base controller to test the others against. Single Joy-Con, this is way too small for my hands. It really feels odd as the D-pad is in the middle of the controller. These would work better when using two, and they are docked. In my opinion, this is a bad controller setup for adults, and maybe it's just me and it's something that people can just get used to, but I felt it is the worst controller in this line up for long gaming sessions. Dual Joy-Cons, this works well when docked and when held independently. The Joy-Cons are still a small size, so it may be uncomfortable to those with large hands. Where the single Joy-Con was just too small, you get very close to the opposite side when you have both. From a gameplay perspective, it feels good. The weight of holding the Switch and controllers will be noticeable. Now for me, I grew up with the first Game Boy, aka the old brick, had a Game Gear, aka the heavier battery-killing brick, then had the Wii U, so my arms are trained for the heavy controller experience. For me it's comfortable as you can keep some distance between your hands. NES, the wireless controller feels just like the original, including those awkward corners that kind of dig into the hand. It has the same weight and the D-pad has the same feel. The only thing I would call a drawback is that these do not use USB-C to charge. Instead, they use the proximity charging by sliding them onto the Switch as you would the Joy-Cons.
And do not try to play like this, it will not go well.
SNES, this controller is perfect for the game. While the NES controller has all the needed buttons, the shape is more nostalgic than comfortable. With the SNES controller, it is lighter and in my opinion feels better in the hand. One of the main drawbacks is that it is often sold out on Nintendo's website. N64, I still have my N64 since it was new, and the controller was always big and clunky. I would recommend that this is reserved for N64 games where the game is designed for the controls. It will work for The Legend of Zelda, so if you find yourself in a situation where you must play and this is the only controller you have with a charge, then go for it. I consider this just above the single Joy-Con in terms of preference, as it has a little more handroom which offsets the weight. The other downside is the clicking sound on the analog stick.
Sounds like a catch-22, you can have a great controller or a great copy of the N64 controller, and this would closer to that second option.
To be fair, it is not designed for this, so keep expectations low. The Pro controller is a modern type of controller with the same button layout as the Xbox type. It is a particularly good controller, and while the SNES controller is lighter and is perfect for The Legend of Zelda, the Pro controller is good for most of the games on the Switch. This is a solid number 2 for this game. For a game that only needs 4 buttons and a D-pad, it is overkill. I'll be honest and say that I always preferred the PlayStation 2 style of controller layouts, but this works. Hori Fighting Stick, if you are looking for a more arcade-type experience or just don't want to use a gamepad, This setup might be what you're looking for. I normally use this for other games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, but it does work for The Legend of Zelda. It is a good controller, responsive but a little noisy. The stick has the standard arcade stick click, you get used to it, but it's there. The Game & Watch, there is a D-pad and buttons, so it counts for this section. As the latest hardware method to play, the controls seemed okay. I am not the greatest of players, and half the time I get hit, it's more likely my fault versus a controller issue. The sound is great, nice and loud when you turn on the music. To do this, press and hold the A button for 5 seconds until you hear the found items chime. If you do this when loading a save, it will give you max hearts. Also for the record, I saw this online but it could have been in the manual, not like I read that.
So tell us, who is the winner?
And the winner is Super Nintendo Controller. Without a doubt one of the great controllers for the Switch for retro gaming. The shape prevents corners from digging in, while extremely light. It has USB-C charging, and a decent battery life for my playstyle. As someone who had the NES controller as their very first gamepad, I will admit some nostalgia, but from a comfortable, I am going to game for hours today, it is SNES all the way for all the day. The Pro controller is nice, but you're holding the weight of all those buttons and analog sticks that you can't use in Zelda. While having good controls are needed to really enjoy a game, the ability to find information to help can be as equally important. For The Legend of Zelda, there are plenty of guides such as the one I have for the GameCube Collector's Edition. There are also websites dedicated to the game as well as plenty of videos such as this with all the goodies you need to know.
So, who are you?
Well, that is easy, you are a little elf kid who bravely sets off to save the world and princess from the evil Ganon. You enter dangerous dungeons looking for loot and the Triforce and find old warriors who give you their swords to save all that is warm and fuzzy. You will fight an evil man-pig with his own style of magic, and if you fail then all shall suffer. If you succeed, then you will claim the Triforce of Power and save the princess. I am sorry, I meant to say the beautiful princess. As you can see, the story is a bit more detailed in the manual and has some precise information to help you become immersed in the world. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the actual gameplay. The one-page scroll does give some insight, but a lot of the details such as Impa, and why every resident in this world is hiding in a cave, under a bush, or in a dungeon.
Seriously, there are no other people walking around in the world or even leaving their one-room spots. There is even one enemy that is so lazy, he won't eat you, but expects you to deliver him some food. The odd part about Hyrule is that there are only 20 or so people, and they are all old. There are no children.
While there is a definite focus on the dungeons in this game, there was a fair amount of attention paid to the overworld, especially since it was one of the first of its kind for the NES. You can find stores to buy supplies such as your shield, bait, and candles. While some stores are out in the open, the best ones are hidden under things or in sealed caves. Use secret passageways that are opened with the power bracelet to speed up travel times. There are gambling houses where you can win a lot of rupees, especially if you use the rewind or save states to cheat a little. If gambling is not your thing, then do not worry. There are malbins hiding which will give you money if you find them. One interesting aspect is that not all the NPCs want to be found, a few will charge you to repair their door when you enter. Yes, you are off trying to save the world and the princess herself, but some NPCs will charge you 10 rupees for saying hi.
Well, those sound fun. What can you tell us about the enemies?
There are a lot of monsters to fight in this game. Each has their own types of tricks such as likes that will eat your shield. Wall masters will return you to the entrance of a dungeon, and there are even monsters that will split into two when hit. Then there are traps and shooting statues to dodge, so it can get rough in some spots.
Each monster is its own puzzle, like the dungeons.
Exactly. It is the perfect game for when you want more than a button masher but can play without needing a PhD in astrophysics.
One of the things I always love about the dungeon crawlers is the loot. What are the goodies?
The game will show a full list of the items, which can be broken down as follows. There are 5 heart containers in the overworld, and another 8 from beating the dungeon bosses, for a total of 16 health. The blue ring can be purchased for 250 rupees, and will reduce the damage you take by half.
That is from one of those hidden stores you mentioned.
Yes. There are plenty of items in the dungeons that are required to clear the game. Missing some like the bow and the recorder will prevent you from completing the level. Other items are a little more optional, such as the magic book, rod, and red ring. The enemies have special drop tables, such as blue Octoroks dropping bombs. There are 2 tricks though. The first is the number of kills before getting hit counter. Blue Octoroks and Gorilla can drop bombs on the 1st, 5th, and 7th kills.
And the other type of item trick is?
The infamous 10th enemy has the bombs. It will use the same kill without getting hit counter, but on the 10th kill, if done with a bomb, it will force the monster to drop bombs. This is very useful to know since there are hidden paths and some monsters that need them to proceed.
Yeah, one time, back before I knew how that worked, I had to leave the dungeon to go spend the 20 rupees to get more, really annoying. What about weapon and shield upgrades?
Well, the shield is easy, you buy it from an NPC for 90 rupees. 130 if you don't mind getting ripped off. For swords, that is a bit different. There are 2 upgrades which double your damage output, but the NPC will require you to have 5 and 12 hearts respectively. There are some really cool items that have fun uses, but for the most part, just remember that most dungeons have one special item, although in 2 it is just the magic boomerang, and the last 2 dungeons have 2 items.
How about the bosses?
As with the dungeons and the overworld, the bosses themselves have several mechanics to deal with. Most are fairly basic, i.e. don't get hit with the fireball. Some bosses, including the final boss, will require certain items to even harm them. Some examples are Goma, which will require the bow, having purchased the arrows and then a rupee for each shot you want to take. Digdogger, which needs the recorder, and then Ganon himself that needs the silver arrows. You can swing your sword all day and get nowhere if you're missing those items.
So what happens after you defeat Ganon?
Well, you save the princess silly, what else? Actually, I take that back, that is pretty much it. This game was created back when space was very limited. Some things like ending cutscenes were not as common, so the ending of this game is a bit unique. The first major note is that there is no end cutscene, a small graphic display, but the really interesting part is the second quest.
The second quest.
When you beat the game, or enter Zelda as your name, you can unlock a new challenge. Most of the items are all in new spots, the dungeon layouts have been changed, and a lot of other changes.
So like 2 games for the price of 1. Nice.
It is. Did you have any other questions?
No, I think we covered everything. Now where does all of this boil down to in 2022? This August will be the 35th anniversary of the North American release, which means it is not a new game. For full disclosure, I am a fan of the Zelda series, however that does not affect nor bias my opinions. The graphics are old, the game premise of hero save princess is basic, and the level of depth of the story in-game is a bit shallow.
A strategy guide or site does help as some of the secrets are cryptic and not intuitive.
All of which would be a horrible game if released in today's market, but back then they pioneered a lot of concepts that we take for granted.
It is an okay game, do not hate, but it has led to refined concepts that we enjoy in the modern games.
I believe that it is worth playing at least a few times, especially for gamers that started on newer platforms.
It does broaden your expectations when you see how little in-game help some of the early gamers had.
Back then there was no internet, no wikis, and required really exploring. You could spend hours trying to burn each bush, looking for hidden caves, and etc.
I remember there was a phone line you could call to get hints. For what it's worth, the long distance from NYC to Redmond, Washington was not cheap on a payphone.
A payphone, wow, now that's retro. While we covered a lot in this video, there are quite a lot of details and hidden rupee spots that are still for you to find.
The how much should you spend is more of the question.
I think that with the Switch Online, basic, service it is worth it, especially if there are other games on the service that you would like. If you are more of a console collector, and you are looking to see if this would be worth it on NES, GameCube or Game Boy Advance, then price check appropriately. While this review was based on the Switch version, I can tell you that the differences between the various ports are minor, and mostly limited to the emulator more than the game.
So features such as save states and rewind may not be available on all platforms.
I enjoy playing it on the Switch, as it is convenient. The main issue I have is that while an online service and virtual console will let you play the game, in the end you do not own it.
You merely have a license to play it for as long as they want to let you.
Let us take Earthbound as an example. It is available via the SNES Classic Mini Console, Wii U on Virtual Console, and Original Cart.
Makes you wonder how you can play these games when all three of those methods are out of production.
Yeah, while I love the ease of game downloads, the fact that the servers can go away is a concern. And that is it for this episode. Just remember that every game stands on the code of what came before it.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe.